Round two. There we go, round two. You guys didn't hear my voice crack the first time. Hey, everybody, welcome to Thursday, December 4th here. And I'm clearly under the weather, but I really wanted to do this here. I woke up feeling sick. All the stuff going on here, it's going around end of the year stuff. But we're in it. We're in it to win it. I want to start with some really exciting news. You guys might see I'm wearing our new swag. We just got a new shipment of shirts in for Nick Valencia News. And we're running a special right now here. We got Make Truth Go Viral on the back end. Donate $30 to Nick Valencia News and you get a free shirt. Everybody loves shirts, right? So we just got these in. So super excited about that. We got our merch in just in time for the holidays. But we wanted to pivot. Usually I start here by talking about our latest reporting and what's been going on. But we wanted to give you an update here about the race in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District and just how close it was. And to do that, we wanted to bring in a friend of the show, Democratic strategist Christian Ramos. Christian, come on in here. Let's talk about Tennessee's 7th and why Democrats should be enthused by what they saw. Let's break down a little bit. Hey, how are you? By the way, how you doing? Good. So who was this race against? And if you could just sort of give us a backstory.
Yeah, no. I think it's important context for this conversation. So Mark Green was the Republican who held that seat. He won in 2024. He retired because he was doing some highly unethical, possibly illegal business dealings. You can never really say in the Trump era because a lot of these grifts are allowed.
Shadiness is accepted. Exactly.
It's a positive. So in 2024, Green won against his Democratic challenger 60 to 38%. That's a 22-point swing. Coincidentally, Trump won that district by nearly 23 points.
Wow.
Last night, Bain only lost that race by 10 points. That's a 13-point swing from where Trump was when he won in 2024. Bain ran a strong race, but the story here is that MAGA voters are depressed by the Epstein saga. And voters who voted last cycle for Trump around the economy are frustrated, angry. They stayed home or voted for Democrats because the cost of living is so high. And I like to give this number here. U.S. employers have announced 1.2 million job cuts so far this year, the highest total since 2020, a recession, and before that, 2008, 2009, also a recession. So it's the cost of living and jobs, I think, are really starting to hurt the Republican brand.
Is your insight into this? Do you think that Democrats are gaining traction there locally in the Nashville area, or is it just this sort of disappointment among Republican voters? Because close only counts in hand grenades and horseshoes, right? You hear that all the time. The Democrats got close, but they didn't win. So how enthused should they really be about this?
Well, I go back to the numbers, a 13-point swing, right? What I think a lot of people don't realize here, there are 22, no, I apologize. There are 46 seats held by Republicans that Trump won by 13% or less.
Wow.
46 seats that Trump won by 13 or less. So if I'm a Democrat, right, and I'm running in one of these seats that Trump previously won by just 13 points or less, and she met that spread, and
that's Afton Bain. That was the Democratic challenger in this one, Afton Bain. Yeah,
they met that spread. I can win. I can win in these red districts. That means,
what will it take, Christian? What will it take to get over that margin? You get close. You've clearly created a gap that is a lot smaller now. But what's it going to take for Democrats to take a seat over?
I'm going to answer your question. I think we have to really lean into this concept that we are a party of change, that we're out there fighting for people to experience a radical change in their life from what we're currently experiencing. But look, I would put it slightly different. It's like a 2-point majority. I was just on a call here where it was communicated to me in DC that the House Republican majority could disappear before the election if people keep retiring. And so when you see these numbers and I'm up for election, and let's say my margin of victory as a Republican was only 2 percentage points, right? And you're clearing your 13 percentage points. I don't want to make this a math lesson,
sure,
but I want to say that if I'm looking at spending the next year, putting my life on hold and running for re-election, and I see these numbers, I'm thinking, wow, I am going to really, really be in trouble here. Do I even put myself through that? Again, they just need two more retirements, and then the Democrats are the majority again.
So Afton Bain was a lot more of a progressive candidate, as we saw last time against Mark Green, and we were talking before the show started, and that could have been one of the reasons that made her successful, or really a challenger with merit here. What does this say about the Democratic Party? You talk about the change going on. We had Congressman Jimmy Gomez on the show earlier this week, and the chat was filled with progressives who were just bashing him for taking money from AIPAC. I have seen, not just anecdotally, but really on the ground in Los Angeles, this third party progressive movement gain some momentum in the Democratic Party. Is that here to stay?
I honestly think this is like an argument for party activists. I think voters don't care. I think voters are really looking at this. They don't look at anything through the prism of right versus left. They're looking at it through the prism of who's going to help me, who's on my side, who's a fighter, who's fighting and not giving up, and is really, sounds like a human being. And so I think on that metric, Bain did a good job. She did what she needed to do. She prosecuted her case. That was a very, very hard election to win because it is such a deep red state.
And you see the difference there is only 10,000 votes, Christian. I mean, that is what Democrats are looking at and seeing promise there.
Absolutely. And look, again, if I'm a Democrat and I'm in a place look, take the redistricting in Texas.
Right.
The Republican Party in Texas banked on Latino voters voting for Republicans the way they did in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
They were banking on turnout being much lower than perhaps it was, right? Those low turnout elections help you in a red state. If we're looking at the turnout and we're looking at, how these things, people are voting now, these redistricting fights that these Republicans are having could backfire significantly on them and their community because those voters are not voting the way they did in 2024.
Wow.
So,
well, we're so excited to have you to talk about Tennessee 7th. While we're here, is there anything else going on that you'd like to discuss? Anything else happening today?
I think people should definitely be paying attention to what's happening in Florida. I think there's a really exciting Senate candidate there, Hector Mujica. He just announced he's running for Senate. I'm actually going to go see him at a meet and greet today. And I think he's got a lot of potential. And if you're seeing those numbers like you're seeing them in a place like Tennessee 7, I think places like Florida, right, where people are really upset about rising prices and everything, and Trump and the MAGA brand is taking a beating, I think, somebody like that could be very competitive.
Well, we always love your insights. We always love you here. I'm so sorry you got to deal with me and my raspy voice here today, man. I appreciate you always stopping by. Christian Ramos, Democratic strategist. We really appreciate you. We'll see you next time, man. All right, that was Christian Ramos who's giving some insight here on Tennessee's 7th Congressional District, a very, very close race between Matt Van Epps and Afton Bain, decided by just 10,000 votes in a place that is ruby red, somewhere where you wouldn't think a Democratic challenger would have a life at all, but Afton made it a very, very close race. So thanks for Christian for breaking that down. We pivot now next. We had a former federal judge, Carla Espinoza. Eric, is she in the waiting room right now? Okay. Let's try to talk to her. I think her camera's off right now, but we want to invite her in, see if she turns her camera on here. Oh, okay. So we're gonna wait. I think we've got some technical problems with the former federal judge, Espinoza. We'll pivot here. We have Raul Pinto. We wanted to talk to the American Immigration Council as well about their latest report that they released at the end of October on family separation. You remember that, in 2018, I was there on the ground in Texas covering family separation. And just to remind you guys what people went through back then, we have a report from 2018.
This 7-year-old boy from Guatemala was finally embraced by his mother in a Baltimore airport this morning after weeks apart. They're just one family lucky enough to reunite after being separated at the U.S.-Mexico border.
This is the only son I have, and I am never going to be separated from him again.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it has unified approximately 500 children, over 15%, with their parents who had been referred for prosecution for illegal entry. By that math, more than 3,300 immigrant children have been separated in the U.S., and a vast majority of them are still wondering when they will see their loved ones again. Cindy Madrid and her 6-year-old daughter Allison are part of that group. Allison's is one of the tiny voices recorded by ProPublica that sparked national outrage this past week. Also this week, CNN spoke with her mother, who is currently being held at this detention facility in Port Isabel, Texas. Allison is reported to be more than 1,200 miles away at a children's center in Phoenix, Arizona. Behind me in this Port Isabel detention center, there are 1,700 detainees, a mixture of both men and women. And we're told by immigration attorneys who have visited their clients inside, most of them have no idea that zero tolerance has ended. In fact, some of them have found out from a Spanish language television inside. It is shocking, Dana, to consider that they're not being told more by the officials inside.
And I remember just the lack of transparency during that first round of the Trump administration. I remember just the lack of details that they would give us, and Freedom of Information Act requests weren't enough. We had to have sources within these agencies to give us insight into exactly what was happening. And speaking of insight, where are we going? We're going to Carla, or are we going to Raul? Where do we go next? All right, let's go to Raul Pinto here. We just got Carla Espinoza's camera on, but we're going to go to Raul Pinto. He's the Deputy Legal Director of Transparency at the American Immigration Council to have more conversation about this report that they released. Raul, thank you so much for joining Nick Valencia Live.
Thank you, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing great. I want to talk about Charlotte, where you're from, in a little bit, but let's get into what was the most insightful thing that you saw here from this report that you guys put out at the end of October.
That's a good question, because that's very tough to choose. But one of the key takeaways from me, from all of the information that we reviewed, was the bipartisan efforts to get transparency after the policy had been announced and then rescinded. Congress, from both parties, were looking into the data, were looking into what was happening, and really pressing Department of Homeland Security to provide the public with answers so that there would be at least a little of accountability, which was arguably never reached. But surely there were attempts by Congress to get there.
One of the things I hear all the time from conservatives is that family separation happens all the time. I know that the agents have discretion as to whether or not, if they believe an adult with a minor is not their family or their kin, they separate them. Trump made it a matter of policy and made everyone crossing a felon the moment they crossed. Give us some more context as to why family separation was such a tragic part of our American history.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that may hold true, but during that short period of time, which the policy only lasted from about April when it was announced to June 20th in 2018, it was supercharged. The numbers just show it. If I hope everyone gets to go to our report showing the numbers, showing the particular spike during that particular few weeks. And just it was almost automatic, which at that time, Secretary Nielsen was continuing to say that they weren't happening as a matter of course, but truly it was. And it was reporters like you all, reporters like Lomi Creel from the Houston Chronicle at the time, sort of giving air to this story that kept popping up, which is that kids were being separated from their families. So that was truly important, that work.
There are children who still have not been reunited with their parents. How many children? What do you know about those cases? Can you give us any anecdotes, Raul?
Well, I think those numbers are really hard to tell, because the data that we reviewed were the numbers given to us by CBP and by the other agencies in response to a FOIA request. And one of the main problems that we saw with that data set is how inaccurate that data truly was. If I can go back and just talk a little bit about the process.
Absolutely.
Once the family was coming in through the border, what was happening is that CBP and Border Patrol was actually marking that child as unaccompanied and the parent as a single adult, and therefore splitting up that family, which made reunifications really, really difficult, which leads to the problem that you are addressing, Nick, which is many kids just continue to be separated. So we really don't know that number. And the second thing that I will add is that separations are continuing till this day, and they look a little different. But they're still being used as almost punishment for individuals to not continue with their immigration process.
And some would call it sanctioned child abuse, Raul.
Absolutely. I think I would agree with that characterization. And using it as a weapon to really get people to abandon their immigration due process.
It was meant to be cruel, to act as a deterrent. We knew that from conversations after Stephen Miller left office. And you have highlighted in your report some key players who really were instrumental in this family separation policy. Who are they, and are they part of the administration now?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that Stephen Miller obviously played a key role in developing the policy. We obviously knew that everything had to be approved by Secretary Nielsen at that point. At that point, AG Jeff Sessions. But the one name that keeps popping up is Tom Homan, who is now the detention czar. And so we're seeing some of these very strategies and tactics being utilized, and the cruelty that you see in some of these cities are being propounded by someone who had a very close hand in the development of this very, very cruel policy.
That's really terrifying, and it should be scary for a lot of people that a name that was so much so at the center of family separation 1.0 is now being brought up in family separation 2.0. I bring this up because he is now, compared to somebody like Greg Bovino or somebody like DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, he's like being painted as this moderate, but he's anything but if he's behind policies like this, Raul.
Absolutely, and I think that he was one of the main pushers of this policy. Denying some of the reports that journalists like yourself were putting out there, and trying to really combat the information that was going out into the public to try to get the public to see exactly what was going on. His efforts and the agency's efforts were to actually try to combat that information with misinformation.
And you know what? If it wasn't for quote unquote good people in bad places, I mean, that's how some of the sources describe themselves to me, the sources that were leaking the information out from the Trump administration. I got invited in on a tour of those Border Patrol facilities to see the kids in cages with my own eyes. And these are images that I will never forget. This happened about a week after they brought in those social workers with the blue polos. And I will never be able to get this image seared in my mind out of a 4-year-old child with this catatonic look. And I remember asking the administration officials we were with the backstory. And she was one of the family separated children who didn't know where her parents were. They alleged that she had been trafficked. We don't know what really the story was. But all I know is I was looking at someone there that may or may not likely ever see their parents or family again. And that, you know, that should anger all of us. That should anger conservatives. That should anger MAGA voters. That should anger, you know, everyone among us here.
And we had hundreds of cases of children that were below 4, and including cases of children that were less than 1 year old. And the agency really trying to combat that messaging and saying, no, we couldn't have possibly done that. And now the data shows, their own numbers shows, their own graphs show that they indeed had kids in their custody separated from their parents who were less than 1 year old, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds.
What's to keep this from happening again?
Oof, that's a good question. That's the $1 million question. I am hopeful. I am hopeful that the lessons learned from that time will prevail this time around. But my greatest fear and concern is that some of the mechanisms that brought light into this issue, for example, some of the reports that were done by the Office of Inspector General for Department of Homeland Security, that the Government Accountability Office that's funded by for Congress, right? That all of those agencies and levers and mechanisms are actually faltering and being actually attacked by this administration, so that we actually won't have that anymore. That the current attacks on journalism and specific journalists, when they are asking those very important questions that the American public should know about, that they are being treated poorly and actually not getting the answers that they want. And you point out that even FOIA requests were actually not very helpful in this regard. Right. I think that's right as well. When we see the agency actually taking searches and not doing the correct searches for documents and not providing with the records, or over redacting records that will bring truth to the policies that are being implemented, that's a huge problem. So those are my concerns going forward. But I am hoping that we can learn from this. And we're seeing a little bit of this now as well with the Venezuelan boats strikes, that Congress is actually engaging back and trying to bring some level of accountability when the administration does its most egregious policies.
The problem, though, and I wholeheartedly agree, the problem is that they are going after these whistleblowers. And I can't say for certain what's happening now in this second administration, but the first administration, those whistleblowers that gave me details, they thought that they were in the clear until I mean, one of them was up for their pension. They were, coming up to the close of retirement. And then all of a sudden, the Office of the Inspector General are launching a report on them, and they were let go and they were fired before receiving their pension. So they were targeted deliberately, we believe, because of the information that they leaked to us. That is the reality of what's happening to people that are trying to blow the whistle on, family separation 1.0. Now we're calling this family separation 2.0. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because it's clear to us that they are going after heads of households, that they are going after the main breadwinners to try to dismantle the family from within. What's your take on what's happening right now under this second iteration?
Yeah, I think that's a very good comparison, right? One of the things that we are very worried about is how those policies and that same cruelty, that baked-in cruelty of the enforcement mechanisms, are actually being utilized. Once again, we've seen enforcement be focused on males, on head of households, as you're mentioning, these family separation tactics. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned before as well, because the decimation of the FOIA offices and oversight offices through the Doge buyouts, through different types of mechanisms where FOIA officers are actually leaving those key officers, and there are gaps in those reportings and how the agencies respond to Freedom of Information Act requests. That can't be understated, and the agency is actually taking a very long time then to respond to these requests that are so important for transparency, adding to the fact that the administration has been a champion, quote unquote, of transparency. They've said that they want to be one of the most transparent administrations in the history of the country.
They claim that they are, Raul. They claim that they are.
Right. And so why are they dismantling these oversight mechanisms so that the public knows exactly what they're doing?
And for those that don't know what a FOIA is, that's a Freedom of Information Act request. It's basically the way, excuse me, it's basically the way journalists and other organizations try to get information that's not completely transparent or forthcoming. Public records requests, you have to go through this whole. I mean, how would you describe it, Raul? Because this part of the stuff that you guys got was through FOIAs.
Absolutely, and you got very close in your description, Nick. We file these requests, and we file these requests for policy documents, any communications that the government may have had. The problem is that specifically the immigration agency, starting with Department of Homeland Security headquarters and going all the way to ICE, CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they have such big backlogs of these types of requests that they are really, really making it difficult for the public to obtain information. So what happens is that we actually have to litigate, and we have to bring them to court in order to try to get those records that are so sorely needed. So as you point out, the gist of this report that we put out was because it took us about 7 years to get a full view of that information. The council has two reports. One is really focused on the harms that children and families were experiencing, as well as the callousness that the government officials were displaying during this time. The second report that we published out in October really talks about sort of the role of journalists and the mechanisms that took to bring some oversight into this catastrophe, if I can call it that.
It is a catastrophe, and it took us going above and beyond. I don't talk about this much. It's something that I've talked about a lot more on this show, but I helped reunite at least 3 children with their parents that I know of, and that was time that I spent off the clock, when I was doing things out of the goodness of my heart, because I could not imagine at that time. I was a new father. I had a new child at home who was just a few months old when I was seeing this stuff, and I couldn't bear to think of children as young as my daughter living away from their parents. I mean, all children need at that young of an age is their mother. Yeah. All they need is somebody to nurture them, and every child has the right to be nurtured. I want to pivot. Go ahead. You want to add something there?
I do, because one of the great features of this report is the experiences of different actors within that system. And one of the components right now is an audio interview with the council's right now director of programs, who at the time was working for Capitol Hill and had a very similar experience to yours. So it's going behind the scenes and hearing those stories. And he says a story and talks about his story very similar to yours, which is, just the personal emotions that went into it, and seeing these children as young as 4, 5, and 6 being separated from their mothers, and their mothers not just being separated, but their mothers not knowing where they were. So if you can imagine, if you have children, young children at that, you can imagine just the pain, the suffering, and knowing that was done in our names, in our country's name, is astonishing. And
I would love to connect you guys with the Women's Refugee Commission, because they say that very thing is happening right now. When they meet women on the Central American side, they don't know where their children are right now, Raul. I mean, it gives me goosebumps. Yeah.
And the other, and I would love to make that connection. That would be great. And the other thing that I want to highlight is we do have additional content being added later this month and in January that will feature the stories of immigration attorneys that were in the same boat and working with families, and journalists that were in the thick of it and really reporting on the story. So I hope that folks get to listen to those audios.
You've been absolutely wonderful. We would be so grateful to have you on anytime, and come back in January to talk to us about that. Before I let you go, though, I know you're from Charlotte. Is that right? You are from Charlotte?
I lived in North Carolina for a very long time. I spent a lot of time in Charlotte. I did more Know Your Rights presentations with the Latino and immigrant communities that I can remember in that city. So I've been there for quite a while. Yes. So
what did you think of what you saw happen there, and how that city caught the ire, but then also really surrounded the Latino community with love there?
One of the things that you should know about Charlotte is that the Latino community really had a hand in building it. And so it was very sad to see places that I went to, neighborhoods that I sort of traveled through, and seeing them sort of under siege, and seeing the pictures being under siege. It was incredibly sad. But as you're pointing out, uplifting at the same time to see the protests coming together and see the community really rallying around Latino businesses who had to close because they weren't. Because they weren't getting their usual clientele, because
or out of fear, they thought they would be targeted.
Exactly right. And so it was both inspiring and sad at the same time. And hopefully there will be a reckoning and a stop to these practices.
God willing. Raul Pinto, thank you so much for taking the time with Nick Valencia Live. We really, really appreciate it. And I mean that. Come back in January to tell us about your report and your new study.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
God bless you, man. Thank you so much. That was Raul Pinto, one of the legal directors over there at the American Immigration Council, telling us about their latest study with family separation. Took them 7 years to get that information. 7 years. And they're just now coming to grips with what the realities were of all those children that were separated. A big takeaway there, they still don't know just how many children have not been reunited with their parents. We turn now to a former federal judge who was targeted by President Trump. We don't know why. Judge Carla Espinoza was sitting on her bench in the middle of a case when she got an email, a 4-sentence email, no reasoning, no justification, just simply telling her that she needed to basically turn in her badge at the end of the day. I don't want to put words in her mouth. I want her to describe it. The former federal judge, Carla Espinoza, joins us live now on Nick Valencia Live. Hello, hello, Judge Espinoza. Can I call you Judge? How should I refer to you?
Primary title, but thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here and to share a little bit about what I've been through, but also what's happening with our justice system, what's happening in our courts, and also here in Chicago with the detention operations that have been happening.
Tell us what happened in your case. How did you find out that you were fired, and why?
So as you described, it was a Friday, July 11th. I was in the middle of a case, and I knew something was happening with my colleagues. We have an internal messaging system. So judges in California, Ohio, just across the nation, I saw them messaging, and it was normally the time where we would be hearing cases. So that was very unusual. And I saw one message, the other, another come through. I was hearing a case, so I could not read the substance of the messages, but I knew something was happening. I did not know at that time whatever was happening also applied to me. So I did my best to continue hearing the case and give the person before me who was detained um, a fair hearing. And at some point, we took a short break because I was ready to render a decision. And then I realized that whatever was happening nationwide also affected me. When the acting assistant chief immigration judge tried to contact me in the middle of the hearing, and then I realized then that I had been targeted for unlawful termination.
They didn't give you a reasoning or a justification, but why do you believe you were fired?
That's correct. So the letter in the email that I received had no reasoning. I requested one thereafter. I am still waiting to hear. I have never
And
gotten a
this is
response.
months later, you're still waiting to hear.
Correct. And I know I'll never know what truly went behind the reasoning for targeting me and other colleagues, but what I can see is patterns. And the pattern that I saw of my colleagues, judges that were appointed in July of 2023, was that mostly women were targeted, that mostly in all judges who use a Hispanic last name were terminated from that class. Middle Eastern last names were terminated. South Asian last names were terminated. We also saw a pattern that judges who previously represented immigrants in their prior careers, especially if they did pro bono work, were terminated. And so when I realized that there was a very clear pattern, it became clear to me that the reasoning was just unlawful discrimination. I believe that they targeted Chicago very heavily, and other cities such as San Francisco and New York have been targeted and continue to be targeted. We just learned last week and even 2 weeks ago, San Francisco was targeted again. A lot of judges were terminated in the same manner without any reasoning. And I was shocked. I was shocked because we all were trying to do a good job, to be fair, to be efficient. I, for one, was in charge of the detained docket at the Chicago Immigration Court, which is by volume the third busiest court in the country.
Wow.
And the detained docket hears cases in the entire Midwest. So it covers the Seventh Circuit, it covers Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana. But sometimes because of the movement of people, they may be located in Kentucky and in other areas. So a very large docket. It's a priority docket, obviously, because people are detained. And I was known for my efficiency and fairness from both sides, government attorneys as well as the private bar. I was adjudicating approximately over 1,000 cases a year, which is significantly more than the goal that was imposed by this administration during the prior term of 700 cases a year. When you compare that to any other federal judge, that's already an incredibly high number, 700 cases. I was adjudicating well beyond that. So I never really thought, based on the messaging that we'd heard, that they wanted to address the backlog, that they would target judges who were doing exactly that, working very hard and efficiently and fairly to hear cases properly. That is, giving people due process.
It seems like they don't care about the backlog of these immigration cases.
I think that's true. I think the backlog is not their priority. I think they want, it seems to me now, based on what I've seen happen, they want to choose judges, even without training. They're willing to do that so long as they believe they will rule a certain way.
bring in these military judges who maybe are more conservative and have no idea the complex immigration law, but they are technically judges, right? And maybe more favorable to how the Trump administration wants them to rule. What happens then to all these cases? Do people just wither away in the private detention infrastructure?
So yes, that is a significant problem that I'm now seeing as an immigration attorney. But just to put things in context, it's not just that military attorneys might have a certain leaning politically. Leaving that aside, you have military attorneys who are used to dealing in martial law, not civilian law. So we have legal concerns about whether that can legally be done in the United States. But then you have other issues. So training is a huge issue. It takes months of training for a judge to become comfortable being on the bench, hearing cases, and doing it well. For me, even though I had a prior career in immigration, so over a decade of experience doing the exact same type of cases that I was hearing, I still went through very extensive training, mentorships. It takes about 6 months to become comfortable being on the bench.
At least, I'm sure.
At least that's when you know the law. You are used to litigating, working with immigration law. So now we have someone who is used to martial law, used to following orders, which is a huge concern. It's a concern that military attorneys are not going to rule on cases based on the facts before them, based on the law, but rather orders. So that is extremely concerning, and it should concern everyone because it is destroying due process for immigrants and for people who are appearing before these judges, and just generally training. There's a formal training relating to the law, to technology, to the infrastructure. There's also practice that is done observing cases, following judges, and mentorships. Those take months. And normally, judges within their first 6 months don't have a full docket. So, by bringing individuals who have no prior training, who are just used to following orders, who are not going to be able to handle a normal docket from day one, and at the same time, getting rid of hundreds now, it's over 100 judges. I think the number of early retirements as well as unlawful terminations is now approximately over 130. So you're getting rid of judges who have training, who have experience, over decades of experience in immigration law or on the bench, and you're bringing someone that doesn't know how to do the job. And they may be great military attorneys, but that's not the issue. The issue is, can they do this job fairly?
They're attacking the judicial system. That's what it feels like from my perspective. What does it feel like to you?
It feels like exactly what you mentioned. They are attacking and weakening the judicial system, and that should be
Why? Why? What's the
for
point?
everyone. Uh, I wish I knew the end goal here, but what I can see day to day is they're attacking the justice system, and at the same time, they're making it unbearable for immigrants. And the attack of the justice system, it affects more than just immigrants, by the way. So there's entire swaths of the Department of Justice that have been dismantled, prosecutors who have been targeted. So there's a lot to analyze there, but focusing on immigrants for purposes of today, they're making it unbearable for them to pursue their cases lawfully, just to pursue what would normally be given to them in hearings that follow due process. And so I think the combination is detaining them. That's what we've seen very heavily here in Chicago. Changing the rules, trying to change the law It's now been determined to have been unlawful by over 300 district courts, and now there's an injunction. But what they were doing is detaining the breadwinners of the household and saying the normal process upon which you can pursue or request a bond hearing before an immigration judge, we're going to take that away. And so now we're going to detain you. We're going to say you're subject to mandatory detention. And obviously, having the breadwinner, the person who usually supports a household, being detained, told that they're not allowed to even request a bond hearing, and having to fight their case, contest their case while being detained, very likely far away from home. At least here in Chicago, individuals were being processed at the Broadview staging facility, but usually were being sent elsewhere. But that included places like Texas, Missouri, Michigan, Indiana, California, Louisiana. So it could have been really far away from their families, but also their lawyers, the members of the community that could help them. So you're isolating them, making it difficult, if not sometimes impossible, to access legal representation.
Cruelty is the point. I mean, that's what we've heard from other immigration attorneys. They go to show up to go see their client and they've been moved. They can't find them within the internal system. They're not offered a chance to have an interview with a bond officer or detention officer, things that are afforded under these immigration laws that we have in this country. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, I'm going to call you Judge Espinoza. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is there was a case that you were part of that may have caught the attention. It became somewhat of a controversial case where there was an undocumented immigrant who was wrongfully accused of sending threatening letters to President Trump. You granted that undocumented immigrant bond. Do you believe it was that case that caught the attention of the administration? Do you think that had anything to do with your firing?
I've thought about it, and I believe that it was likely a part of what led to my unlawful dismissal. And part of it is I was always going to do the right thing, rule based on the evidence before me and the facts as had been presented to me. The Department of Homeland Security had an attorney representing their interest that did not file any evidence or made any arguments against bond being granted. And at that point, it was clear based on rulings in Wisconsin that someone else had been charged for trying to impersonate this immigrant. And so I ruled based on the law, which requires me to consider whether a person is a danger to the community or a flight risk. And at that time, that person, there was no evidence that he was a danger to the community because there was no evidence that he actually made those threats.
Right.
Quite to the contrary, there was a lot of evidence that he did not make those threats, or that he was a flight risk, having been in this country for decades and having very strong ties to the community. Now, I ruled fairly, and I'm very happy with the decision I made because it's something that I can live with. I do believe that it caught the attention of high-level government officials and perhaps the administration, because just days before I made a ruling on the bond, Secretary Christino made public statements saying that this individual should remain detained and would remain detained. And well, that's inconsistent because if you know the legal process, I was about to decide whether he should be released on bond. So to say that with that level of confidence told me one of two things. Either she didn't know the legal process, which is very likely, or she knew what was happening and yet said that almost as intimidation to me, maybe to rule a certain way. I don't know. I don't know which of the two it is, but certainly it seems like it's one of those two options.
Ms. Espinoza, there can't be that many Latina federal judges out there. I don't know what the number is, but in talking to you and looking at you, I can't help but think that this administration fired somebody who has been the jewel of the eye of their family, I'm sure, who has broken through so many barriers and gone through so much adversity as a woman of color in this country to achieve and get to the level that you got to. I would just love to hear from you personally about what this did to you personally by having this job that you work so diligently towards achieving, this goal ripped away from you unlawfully and unjustly.
It was very difficult, partly because as judges and lawyers, we believe in justice. And so when something unfair happens, it's very hard to come to grips to something unlawful, illegal, and unfair happening to you, a person that wanted to impart the law, believes in justice. And so it certainly took some time for me to process what had happened. I was in shock. And it was difficult to try to explain that to my loved ones at home who also did not understand the why. And the reality is there is no reason why. There is no legitimate reason why. And so, well, I don't know that I'll ever get that closure. I do know that it obviously affected me personally because, as you said, not just me, but all of my colleagues made huge sacrifices to become judges. A lot of them, people sometimes don't realize this. A lot of them took, include myself included, pay cuts to become judges. I sold my interest in my law firm that I previously owned. A lot of judges in my class of judges, the July 2023 class, had to move. Some of them had to leave their families behind. Some of them had to travel once a month to see their children. Some of them had to leave their spouses behind. Some of them had to rent additional apartments to cover courts that needed their help. And sometimes people don't realize all of the sacrifices that public servants made, especially that immigration judges in the class that I was in made to serve. And when you do all of that to then become a judge and then be treated this way in an extremely disrespectful way, obviously is disheartening. But as a person of the law, I did the only thing that I know what to do, which is obviously fight for justice. That's what I'm doing now as an immigration attorney. That's what I'm doing now personally for myself, challenging the unlawful actions of the administration interpreting judges, as well as challenging the unlawful actions in the way they're processing immigrants and detaining them, and having asserted that they were subject to mandatory detention.
Yeah. Well, we know you're continuing the fight now as an immigration attorney. They're based in Aurora, Illinois, and you're taking up this fight here. You're not giving up, and that's giving us a lot of enthusiasm here to continue to see that someone like you who has gone through so much is not giving up. The last question I have for you, Judge Espinoza, do you still have faith in the judicial system?
It's diminished. So there's two aspects. I have been very happy and pleasantly surprised to see district court judges, which now to me have become the real life equivalent of the Avengers, in realizing that unlawful things are happening in our country and they're trying to stop it. And so I personally secure in the past few weeks over half a dozen of orders from district court judges ordering the release of my clients who are unlawfully detained. And that gives me a lot of hope. So I know that part of the court system to some degree is working. I think it's important to say a lot of these district court judges are doing it at a high cost. A lot of them had been targeted and threatened. So the entire justice system is being attacked in different ways. A lot of them have been called names. The administration has sued some district court judges. So there's a systematic attack. I believe judges are doing their best to do what's right, to rule based on the law, and to make sure that people get due process. And so that gives me hope. And of course, I'm going to continue in that fight to continue making sure that we get due process here.
Former federal judge Carla Espinoza, attorney at law, thank you so much for taking the time with Nick Valencia Live. We are so grateful for your time, and we really are inspired by your story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You got it. That was Carla Espinoza. What a show, guys. What a show. And hopefully you guys were able to hear me. Clearly my voice got worse as the show went on. I can't even make a statement now here. Well, this is what I'm really excited about, though. Our new merch. Make sure to go viral. I can't talk. My voice is gone. God. I hope you guys had a great. I hope you guys were able to, get something out of that show. Clearly, I got to go rest my voice and go back to bed or something. I can't even talk. Guys, thank you so much for watching Nick Valencia Live, our latest edition. I'm going to go back and laugh at this. Jeez. Thank you so much for helping make truth go viral. And as always, have a great day on purpose.